The observation deck of the Galactic Survival Institute gleamed with a cold, sterile light. Deho stood among 11 other beings, each representing a different species from across the known galaxy. He was the only human in the room, and he could feel the eyes of the others upon him. Some looked curious. Others looked dismissive. A few seemed amused that such a fragile-looking creature had been selected for the trial. Director Halvor floated at the front of the chamber. His crystalline body refracted light in strange patterns as he spoke. His voice came through the translators that each participant wore. Welcome to Trial World K447. You have been chosen because your species wishes to prove its worth in extreme survival situations. The galaxy is watching. Deho listened carefully. He had trained for this moment for 3 years. After winning the global survival competition on Earth, he had been selected as humanity's representative. He was 32 years old, an engineer by trade, but his real passion was wilderness survival. His grandfather had taught him the old ways, the methods that Koreans had used for thousands of years to survive brutal winters. The director continued. The surface temperature averages -60 degrees Celsius. Winds reach 150 kilometers per hour. You will each be given basic supplies: 1 thermal blanket, 1 ration pack, water purification tablets, and an emergency beacon. If you activate the beacon, you will be extracted immediately. The trial lasts 10 days. A massive insectoid creature named Korth clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter. 10 days? My people survive in volcanic vents. This frozen rock will be nothing. Beside him, a reptilian being called Velthar nodded slowly. His scales were deep green and his eyes were sharp with intelligence. My species evolved on a desert world. We know how to conserve energy and warmth. This trial is simply a matter of patience. Deho said nothing. He had learned long ago that talking before action was worthless. Instead, he studied the holographic display of the planet below. Rocky valleys, ice formations, sparse vegetation that somehow survived in the extreme cold. He memorized everything he could see. An amphibious being named Rixna moved closer to the display. Her skin was blue-green and glistened with moisture. The wind patterns suggest shelter in the valleys, she said softly. That is where I will wait out the storm. Director Halvor's crystalline form pulsed. You will be dropped in separate zones within a 50-kilometer radius. The trial begins in 1 hour. Prepare yourselves. The participants dispersed to their holding areas. Deho went to his assigned room and checked his supplies one final time. The thermal blanket was standard galactic issue, made from advanced materials that reflected body heat. The ration pack contained compressed nutrition bars that tasted like cardboard, but would keep him alive. The water purification tablets were simple enough, and the emergency beacon was a small device that would summon rescue within minutes. He thought about his training. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Survival is not about waiting for rescue. It is about taking action. Cold is your enemy, but fire is your friend. Never stop moving. Never stop thinking. Deho closed his eyes and visualized what he would need to do. Other species might have thick fur or scales or the ability to slow their metabolism. Humans had none of these advantages. But humans had something else. They had the ability to change their environment. They had hands that could build. They had minds that could plan. They had ancestors who had survived ice ages and brutal winters with nothing but stone tools and determination. The hour passed quickly. Deho was led to the drop pod along with the others. Each participant entered their own pod. Through the transparent wall he could see Korth flexing his powerful limbs. Velthar sat perfectly still, already entering a meditative state. Rixna checked her supplies 3 times, her movements nervous. The pods launched in sequence. Deho felt the stomach-dropping sensation of falling through atmosphere. The pod shook violently as it descended through the storm clouds. Through the window he could see sheets of ice and snow blasting past. The temperature display inside the pod dropped rapidly. -40, -50, -60. The pod slammed into the ground with enough force to rattle his teeth. The door hissed open and the cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind screamed across the rocky valley, carrying ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Deho grabbed his supplies and stumbled out of the pod. Within seconds, his face felt numb. He looked around quickly. Rocky outcroppings on both sides. Sparse brown vegetation poking through the snow. In the distance, he could see what looked like dead trees, their branches stripped bare by the wind. The sky was a dark gray and snow fell so thick he could barely see 30 meters ahead. Deho knew he had minutes to make critical decisions. His body was already losing heat. Standing still meant death. He needed shelter and he needed fire. The thermal blanket would help, but it would not be enough. Not for 10 days in this nightmare. He began walking toward the rocky outcroppings, fighting against the wind. His legs pushed through snow that came up to his knees. Every breath burned in his lungs. But his mind was working, calculating, planning. He spotted 2 large boulders that formed a natural windbreak. Perfect. Setting down his supplies, Deho began to work. He used his hands to dig into the snow between the boulders, clearing a space. The physical exertion warmed his body slightly, but he knew that would not last. He needed real warmth. He needed fire. Moving quickly, he gathered materials. Dry grass from beneath the snow. Animal droppings that were frozen solid, but would burn once dried by fire. Pieces of dead wood from the scattered trees. Flat rocks that he could use for construction. His grandfather's training guided every movement. He began to dig deeper, creating a pit between the boulders. The frozen ground was hard, but he chipped away at it with a rock. He arranged flat stones in a pattern, creating channels that led from a firebox at the entrance into the shelter space. More flat rocks covered the channels. This was the ancient Ondal system, the underfloor heating that Koreans had used for thousands of years. Above in the orbiting station, Director Halvor watched the thermal displays. Most participants had activated their thermal blankets and huddled in place, waiting for the storm to pass. But one signature showed unusual activity. The human was moving constantly, gathering materials, building something. "What is it doing?" one of the alien observers asked. Halvor's crystalline body pulsed with interest. "I do not know, but it is using more energy than the others. That should be disadvantageous." On the frozen surface, Deho worked through the pain and cold. His fingers were nearly frozen, but he could not stop. He created a firebox from stones at the entrance of his shelter. He gathered his driest tinder and placed it carefully. Then, using a method his grandfather had taught him, he created friction with a wooden stick and dry grass. It took several attempts. His hands shook. His breath came in gasps. But finally a spark caught. Smoke rose. Then a small flame. Deho carefully fed the flame with dry grass and small pieces of wood. The fire grew. He placed it in the stone firebox and began adding larger pieces. The heat started to travel through the stone channels beneath his shelter floor. Slowly, carefully, warmth began to build. He covered the top of his shelter with his thermal blanket and packed snow around the edges for insulation. The wind howled outside, but inside his small space the temperature began to rise. The heated stones beneath him radiated warmth upward. It was crude and simple, but it was working. Deho sat back against the stone wall and let out a long breath. His body ached. His face was still numb from the cold. But he was warm. Actually warm. He placed snow in a container near the fire to melt for water. He opened one of his ration bars and ate slowly. Outside, the blizzard intensified. The temperature dropped to -65 degrees. In the observation station, 3 emergency beacons activated within the first 6 hours. 3 species had already failed. But in a small shelter between 2 boulders, a human sat warm and dry, tending his fire and thinking about the next 9 days. The trial had only just begun. The first night on Trial World K447 was brutal. The storm that had been threatening finally arrived with full force. Wind speeds reached 170 kilometers per hour. The temperature plummeted to -70 degrees. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to less than 5 meters. In various locations across the trial zone, the alien participants struggled to survive. Felthar, the intelligent reptilian, had burrowed deep into a snowbank. He wrapped himself in his thermal blanket and entered a state of deep hibernation. His species had evolved this ability to survive extreme conditions on their desert world during cold nights. But his body was designed for dry cold, not the wet, penetrating cold of this frozen planet. His core temperature dropped dangerously low. His hearts beat slower and slower. Rixna had found a cave system carved into the rocky hills. She huddled in the deepest chamber, her amphibious body shivering violently. Her species came from a world of moderate temperatures and abundant water. This extreme cold was completely foreign to her biology. She wrapped the thermal blanket around herself 3 times, but it was not enough. Ice began to form on her skin. Her breathing became shallow. Korth, the massive insectoid, had chosen a different strategy. His species survived in volcanic environments where the heat was intense. He believed that constant movement would generate enough body heat to keep him warm. For the first few hours, this worked. His powerful legs carried him through the snow. His metabolism burned hot. But as the night wore on and the temperature continued to drop, his body began to fail. He was burning through energy reserves at an unsustainable rate. His movements became slower. His limbs began to lock up. In the observation station far above, Director Halvor and his team monitored each participant. The thermal displays told a clear story. Most of the aliens were barely registering on the heat sensors. Their life signs were dropping into dangerous ranges. But one display showed something completely different. The human's shelter glowed bright on the thermal scan. The temperature inside registered at 10 degrees Celsius. In the middle of a deadly blizzard and negative 70-degree weather, the human had created a warm environment. "This cannot be correct," one of the observers said. "Run a diagnostic on the sensors." The diagnostic came back clean. The readings were accurate. "Is he using unauthorized technology?" another observer asked. Halvor examined the detailed scans. "No, the energy signature is from combustion. He is burning organic matter. But the heat distribution pattern is unusual. It is not a simple fire. There is engineering involved." Inside his shelter, Deho tended to his fire carefully. He had learned from his grandfather that maintaining a fire through a long night required planning. Too much fuel at once and you waste resources. Too little and the fire dies. He fed the flame steadily, keeping the heat flowing through the stone channels beneath his floor. The Ondel system was working perfectly. The heated stones radiated warmth upward into the shelter space. The temperature was comfortable enough that he could remove his outer jacket. He had hung it near the entrance to dry. His boots were also drying by the fire. Wet clothing was death in cold weather, another lesson his grandfather had taught him. Deho melted snow for water and drank slowly. Hydration was critical. The cold air was dry and would dehydrate him quickly if he was not careful. He ate half of one ration bar and saved the rest. 10 days was a long time. He needed to think ahead. As the night wore on, Deho made improvements to his shelter. He gathered more stones and created a second chamber in his Ondel system. This would distribute heat more evenly. He used the thermal blanket more effectively, hanging it from the ceiling to create an insulated pocket of warm air. He built a small shelf from flat rocks where he could store his supplies off the frozen ground. The wind howled outside like a living thing. Snow piled against the entrance to his shelter. But Deho was warm. His mind was clear. He thought about the other participants. Were they surviving? Were they warm? Part of him felt concern for them. But another part understood that this was a competition, a test. Each species had to prove themselves. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken slightly. The wind dropped to 100 kilometers per hour. The snow thinned. Pale gray light filtered through the entrance of Deho's shelter. He added more fuel to the fire and prepared for the day ahead. In the observation station, emergency alerts began to sound. 3 beacons had activated during the night. 3 participants were in critical condition and needed immediate extraction. Director Halvor ordered the rescue teams to deploy. "Bring them up quickly. Monitor their vital signs." The first extraction was a furred mammalian creature from a tundra world. Ironically, despite coming from a cold planet, he had not survived the extreme conditions of the trial world. His species had evolved thick fur and a slow metabolism, but he had made the mistake of staying still. Without generating body heat through movement or fire, he had slowly frozen. The second extraction was a silicon-based life form that had miscalculated the energy requirements. His crystalline structure had begun to fracture from the cold. The rescue team brought him aboard just as his core was beginning to shatter. The third extraction was a humanoid from a tropical world. She had lasted 6 hours before her body simply shut down from hypothermia. The thermal blanket had not been enough. The observers in the station looked at the remaining participants with concern. Of the 12 who had started, only 9 remained. And most of those 9 were showing dangerous vital signs. "Should we end the trial?" one observer asked. "We are losing participants rapidly." Director Halvor's crystalline form pulsed thoughtfully. "No, the trial continues. This is valuable data. We are learning which species can truly adapt to extreme conditions." On the surface, Velthar stirred from his hibernation. His internal clock told him that dawn had arrived. He slowly emerged from his snow burrow, his movements sluggish. His core temperature was dangerously low. His thoughts were slow and confused. He looked around at the frozen landscape and realized he was in serious trouble. His species adaptation was not enough. Not here. Rixna opened her eyes in the cave. Her body was covered in a thin layer of ice. She tried to move but found her limbs stiff and unresponsive. Terror filled her mind. She was dying. Slowly but surely she was freezing to death. Korth had stopped moving hours ago. His massive body lay in the snow, his limbs locked in place. His metabolism had burned through all his energy reserves. He did not have the strength to move. He did not have the strength to activate his emergency beacon. He simply lay there, consciousness fading. Deho emerged from his shelter into the gray morning light. The wind was still strong, but manageable now. He looked around at the frozen landscape. Snow had drifted against the rocks. The dead trees were covered in ice. Everything was harsh and hostile. But Deho felt good. His body was rested. His mind was sharp. He had survived the first night comfortably. Now he needed to think about the next 9 days. He needed more fuel for his fire. He needed to find food beyond the ration bars. He needed to improve his shelter even more. He spent the morning gathering dead wood from the sparse trees. The physical work kept him warm. He found animal tracks in the snow and followed them to a burrow. Small ice-dwelling creatures lived here. They would be protein if he could catch them. By midday, Deho had expanded his shelter. He dug out more space and extended the ondel channels. He created a proper smoke hole so the fire would draw better. He built a drying rack where he could smoke meat if he caught any. His grandfather had taught him that survival was not just about making it through one day. It was about building systems that would sustain you for as long as needed. In the observation station, the alien representatives from different species watched the displays with growing disbelief. The human was not just surviving. He was thriving. He was improving his situation hour by hour. While their own species struggled and failed, this supposedly fragile creature was building what looked like a permanent settlement. How is this possible? One representative demanded. Humans have no special adaptations for cold. They have no thick fur, no ability to hibernate, no special metabolism. Director Halvor studied the human shelter carefully. They have something else. They have the ability to manipulate their environment. They do not adapt to the cold. They eliminate the cold. As the second day ended, 2 more emergency beacons activated. 2 more species admitted defeat. The trial that was supposed to last 10 days had already eliminated 5 of 12 participants. And the human, the one many had dismissed as weak, was the only one who showed no signs of distress. Deho sat in his warm shelter that evening, eating a meal of cooked meat from a small animal he had trapped. The fire burned steadily in his ondel system. The heated floor kept him comfortable. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -75 degrees. Another storm was building on the horizon. But inside his shelter, Deho was warm. He was dry. He was fed. He was surviving not by enduring the cold, but by defeating it. And he was just getting started. By the 3rd day of the trial, the situation had become desperate for most of the remaining participants. 7 of the original 12 had already been extracted. Their species had failed the test. Only 5 remained on the frozen surface of Trial World K447, and 4 of them were in critical condition. Velthar lay in his snow burrow, his reptilian body barely functioning. His intelligence, which had made him confident at the start of the trial, now worked against him. He was aware enough to understand that he was dying. His core temperature had dropped so low that his organs were shutting down one by one. His thoughts moved like cold honey, slow, thick, painful. Through his dimming consciousness, Velthar noticed something. His advanced senses, even while failing, detected a heat signature. It was faint and far away, but it was there. Something warm existed on this frozen planet, something that should not exist. With the last of his strength, Velthar began to crawl. His limbs barely responded. Each movement took enormous effort. His claws scraped against ice and rock. His body left a trail in the snow. He did not know what the heat signature was. It might be a thermal vent. It might be a malfunction in his sensors. But it was his only hope. The journey took 8 hours. Velthar covered less than 3 kilometers. Several times he stopped, believing he could go no further. But each time he felt that distant warmth calling to him. Finally, as the gray afternoon light began to fade, he saw it. A shelter built between two boulders. Smoke rising from a carefully constructed chimney, and warmth, blessed warmth radiating from the structure. Velthar collapsed at the entrance. He could not move another centimeter. His vision faded. He heard sounds, footsteps. Then strong hands grabbed him and dragged him inside. Deho had heard the scraping sound outside his shelter. His first thought was that an animal was approaching. He grabbed a makeshift weapon, a strong stick with a sharpened stone tied to the end. But when he looked outside, he saw the reptilian alien lying in the snow. For a moment, Deho hesitated. This was a competition. Every participant was supposed to survive on their own. Helping another species could be seen as interference. But his grandfather's teachings echoed in his mind again. A man who can help but does not is no man at all. Deho dragged Velthar into the shelter. The alien was heavy and his scales were cold as ice. Deho positioned him on the heated floor stones near where the Ondol system was warmest. He covered Velthar with the thermal blanket and began the slow process of warming him. He had learned about hypothermia treatment during his survival training. You could not warm someone too quickly or their body would go into shock. It had to be gradual. Deho placed containers of warm water near Velthar's body. He massaged the alien's limbs to encourage blood flow. He monitored Velthar's breathing and heart rate. After an hour, Velthar's eyes opened. The alien's translator device activated. His voice was weak. What? You're in my shelter, Deho said calmly. You were freezing. I brought you inside. Velthar's intelligent eyes focused on Deho. Then they moved around the shelter. He saw the fire burning in the stone firebox. He saw the channels in the floor that carried heat throughout the space. He saw the dried meat hanging from racks. He saw the organized supplies. He felt the warmth surrounding him. How? Velthar whispered. How are you generating this heat? Deho stirred the fire and added another piece of wood. It's called Ondol. My ancestors developed it thousands of years ago in Korea. Fire heats stones. Stones heat the floor. Floor heats the space. Simple physics. Velthar tried to sit up but was too weak. But this takes planning, engineering, labor. Most species would conserve energy in extreme conditions. Conserving energy in deadly cold just means you die slower, Deho said. He offered Velthar a container of warm water. Humans survive by changing our environment. We don't wait for conditions to improve. We make them improve. In the observation station, Director Halvor watched this interaction with intense interest. The human had just saved a competitor. This was not in the rules. It was not forbidden, but it had never happened before in any previous trial. Species fought for their own survival. They did not help others. Should we intervene? An observer asked. This changes the nature of the trial. Halvor's crystalline body pulsed thoughtfully. No, this is fascinating. Let us see what happens. The director ordered the humans' shelter to be broadcast to all the species representatives watching the trial. Within minutes, the footage was being viewed by billions of beings across the galaxy. Shock rippled through the galactic community. A human, considered a relatively new and unsophisticated species, was not only surviving the trial, but had built a functioning shelter with heat and food. More shocking, he had saved a member of a species that had mocked him during the selection process. Velthar spent the evening recovering in the shelter. Deho shared his food and water. He explained how the Ondol system worked, how he had gathered materials, how he planned for each day. Velthar listened with growing amazement. On my world, Velthar said, we prize intelligence above all else. We analyze. We calculate. We plan carefully before action. But you act and adapt constantly. You build and improve without stopping. Deho smiled slightly. My grandfather used to say that thinking without doing is just dreaming. And dreaming in the cold means dying. That night, another emergency beacon activated. Somewhere in the frozen wastes, another participant had given up. That left only 4. Deho, Velthar, and 2 others who were still out in the cold somewhere. The next morning, Deho checked his supplies. With 2 people in the shelter, he would need more food and fuel. He prepared to venture out into the cold to gather resources. Velthar watched him with concern. You are going out in this weather? Velthar asked. The wind outside was howling again. I have to, Deho said. The fire needs fuel. We need food. Survival is not about hiding from the world. It's about working with it. Deho went out into the storm. He knew the area around his shelter now. He knew where to find dead wood. He knew where the small animals burrowed. He moved efficiently, gathering what he needed and returning quickly. While he was out, an alarm sounded in the observation station. Another emergency beacon had activated. This one belonged to Rixna, the amphibious being. Her vital signs were critical. Director Halvor checked her location. She was 3 kilometers from the human shelter. He made an announcement that went to all participants. Emergency beacon activated. Participant in critical condition at coordinates transmitted to all survivors. Deho received the transmission on his device. He looked at the coordinates. 3 kilometers. In this weather, it would take over an hour to reach her. He looked at Velthar, who was still too weak to move much. "You are considering going after her?" Velthar said. It was not a question. "She's dying," Deho said. "This is a competition. She is not your responsibility." Deho checked his supplies. He fashioned a sled from branches and his extra thermal blanket. "My grandfather fought in a war when he was young. He told me that he learned something important. The only way to truly win is to make sure as many people as possible survive." Velthar watched as Deho prepared to leave. "You are a strange species, human. You could win this trial easily by letting the rest of us die, but instead you risk yourself to save us. Winning isn't worth much if you lose yourself in the process," Deho said. Then he stepped out into the storm. The journey to Rixna's location was brutal. The wind tried to knock Deho off his feet with every step. Snow blasted into his face. The cold penetrated his clothing despite his best efforts. But he pushed forward, following the coordinates on his device. He found Rixna in a collapsed ice cave. She was partially buried in snow and ice. Her amphibious skin had turned a dark blue-gray. She was barely breathing. Deho worked quickly. He dug her out. He used his own body heat to warm her core. He rubbed her limbs to stimulate circulation. Then he placed her on the sled and began the long journey back. By the time Deho reached his shelter, he was exhausted. Velthar helped drag Rixna inside. Together they positioned her on the heated floor stones. Deho repeated the warming process he had used on Velthar. As the warmth slowly revived Rixna, Deho collapsed against the wall. His body ached. His face was numb from cold exposure. But Rixna was alive. Velthar was alive, and the fire still burned warm. In the observation station, Director Halvor made a note in his records. The human had now saved 2 competitors. This trial was revealing something unexpected about humanity, something that might change how the galaxy viewed these newcomers. 3 beings now occupied the small shelter. Outside, the temperature dropped to -80 degrees. The worst storm yet was building on the horizon. But inside, warmed by ancient human technology and human compassion, 3 species from different worlds survived together. The trial was only halfway complete, and the galaxy was watching with growing fascination. Rixna woke slowly, her consciousness returning in fragments. The first thing she noticed was warmth. Real comfortable warmth surrounding her body. For a moment, she thought she had been extracted from the trial. But then she opened her eyes and saw the shelter. Stone walls, a fire burning in a carefully constructed box. 2 other beings sitting nearby. One was Velthar, the reptilian she recognized from the selection. The other was the human. "Deho, you saved me," Rixna said through her translator. Her voice was weak but clearer than Velthar's had been. Deho was preparing food, roasting meat from his recent hunt over the fire. "You were dying. I brought you here." Rixna looked around the shelter with growing wonder. The heated floor beneath her was comfortable. She could see the system of stone channels that carried heat from the fire. Supplies were organized on rock shelves. Meat hung drying on wooden racks. This was not just a survival shelter. This was a home. "On my world," Rixna said slowly, "we wait for favorable conditions before we act. We are patient. We let the environment change naturally. But you," she gestured at the shelter, "you create favorable conditions. You force the environment to change." Velthar nodded from his position near the fire. "I have been thinking about this since he saved me. Humans are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest. Their senses are not the sharpest. But they have something we lack. They refuse to accept their circumstances. They are persistently stubborn." Deho smiled slightly. "We prefer to call it determination. My people have survived ice ages, deserts, jungles, and mountains. This frozen planet is hard, but it's nothing new. Humans have seen worse. He divided the cooked meat among the three of them. Rixana ate slowly, feeling strength return to her body. The warmth of the shelter and the food combined to revive her. She watched Daeho as he worked. He never seemed to stop. He tended the fire. He checked the Ondol channels. He organized supplies. He planned for the next day. "Do you ever rest?" Rixana asked. "I rest at night," Daeho said. "But during the day there is always work to do. The fire needs fuel. We need water. Food must be gathered. The shelter can always be improved." That afternoon, Daeho expanded the shelter again. With 3 occupants, they needed more space. He dug out a larger area and extended the Ondol system to heat the new section. Felthar and Rixna helped where they could, though both were still recovering. Felthar proved useful for planning. His intelligence helped optimize the shelter's design. Rixna, once she regained her strength, showed skill in preparing food and organizing supplies. The 3 beings began to work as a team. In the observation station, the galactic audience watched with fascination. The trial had become the most viewed event in galactic history. Markets across the galaxy began to shift. Human trade goods saw a surge in value. Diplomatic requests to Earth increased tenfold. Everyone wanted to understand this species that seemed so unremarkable yet proved so capable. Director Halvor studied the data carefully. "The human has created something unprecedented," he told his team. "He has turned a survival trial into a community. The other 2 are not just surviving now. They are learning, adapting, changing their approach." On the surface, day 6 arrived with a severe cold snap. The temperature dropped to -85 degrees. The wind reached 190 kilometers per hour. It was the worst conditions yet. Somewhere in the frozen wastes, the last independent participant finally gave up. Korth, the massive insectoid, had lasted longer than most. His powerful body and fierce pride had kept him going when others had failed. But even he had limits. His energy reserves were completely depleted. His limbs would no longer respond. His pride finally broke, and he activated his emergency beacon. The rescue team found him half buried in snow, his body locked in a frozen position. They brought him to the observation station where medical teams worked to revive him. As he recovered in the medical bay, Korth learned about the human's shelter. He learned that 3 species were surviving together in warmth and relative comfort. His pride, already wounded by his failure, took another blow. Director Halvor came to visit Korth in the medical bay. "You are strong," the director said. "But strength alone is not enough in this trial." Korth's mandibles clicked weakly. "The human, I mocked him during selection. Called him soft skin, said his species was weak, and now?" Halvor asked. "Now I understand that I am the weak one." He did not survive through strength. He survived through intelligence and action. And more than that, he helped others. While I was too proud to even consider activating my beacon until nearly dead, he was rescuing competitors. Halvor's crystalline form pulsed. "There is a transmission from the surface. The human is requesting extraction for you." Korth was confused. "I have already been extracted." I activated my beacon. "Yes, but you are still within the trial zone officially. The human has asked if you can be brought to his shelter instead of the station. He says the journey to the station in your condition might be dangerous. He offers his shelter as a recovery location." Korth felt something he had rarely experienced: shame and gratitude. He would do this? After I mocked him? It seemed so. Korth made his decision. "Take me to his shelter." The shuttle landed near Daeho's shelter that evening. The rescue team helped Korth out. The massive insectoid could barely walk. His limbs were damaged from the cold. Daeho emerged from the shelter and looked up at the towering alien. "You need help," Daeho said simply. "Come inside." It took all 4 of them to get Korth into the shelter. His body was too large to fit through the entrance easily. Daeho had to quickly expand the opening. Finally, they positioned Korth on the heated floor. The insectoid's body began to warm slowly. Korth looked at Daeho through compound eyes that reflected the firelight. "I was wrong about you," he said through his translator. "During selection, I thought you were weak. I thought humans were nothing special. I apologize." Daeho stirred the fire, adding more fuel. "Survival is not about pride. You needed help. Now you are getting it. That is all that matters." The shelter now held 4 beings. It was crowded but warm. Daeho organized the space efficiently. Each person had a designated area on the heated floor. Supplies were stored carefully. The fire burned constantly, fed in shifts so it never died. That night, as the four beings sat in the warm shelter while the storm raged outside, they talked. They shared stories of their homeworlds. Velthar spoke of the vast deserts of his planet. Rixina described the beautiful oceans of her world. Korth told of the volcanic mountains where his people lived. And Deho spoke of Earth, of mountains and forests, of his grandfather who had taught him the old ways, of humanity's long history of survival. Your species has never stopped struggling, Velthar observed. You have no period in your history where life was easy. Deho shook his head. No, humans have always had to fight. Fight the cold, fight the heat, fight hunger and predators and disease. We have no special adaptations like you do. No thick scales or ability to hibernate or powerful strength. We only have our minds and our hands and our refusal to give up. Rixina looked at the Ondal system, still radiating warmth. This technology. How old is it? Thousands of years, Deho said. My ancestors developed it during the Three Kingdoms period in Korea. They were trying to survive winters that killed many people. They looked at the problem and found a solution. Heat the floor, warm the home. Simple but effective. Korth clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. We focused on individual survival. Each of us tried to endure the cold alone using our own species' advantages. But you built a home. You created civilization in 10 days. Humans are social, Deho explained. We survive better in groups. Alone we are weak. Together we are strong. That is how we conquered Earth. Not through individual power, but through cooperation. In the observation station, Director Halvor replayed the day's footage for the assembled species representatives. The humans' words were being analyzed by linguists and philosophers across the galaxy. This simple trial had revealed something profound about humanity. They were not impressive as individuals. They had no special powers or adaptations, but they had something that many galactic species had lost over their long civilizations. They had the drive to constantly improve their situation. They had the compassion to help others even when it put them at risk. And they had the wisdom to understand that true strength came from community. As the 7th day ended, the observation station released a statement. Of the 12 participants who had started the trial, 11 had either been extracted or were now sheltering with the human. Only the human had succeeded in the trial as originally designed. But he had done more than succeed. He had changed the trial into something else entirely. In the warm shelter, Deho tended the fire one last time before sleeping. Around him, 3 alien beings rested on the heated floor. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -90 degrees. The worst night yet. But inside, 4 species from 4 different worlds slept warm and safe. The human had not just survived. He had built something that transcended survival. He had built hope. Days 8 and 9 passed with a rhythm that surprised everyone. The shelter that had started as a desperate survival structure had transformed into something else. A home, a community. 4 beings from 4 different worlds lived and worked together in harmony. Deho had established a routine that kept everyone busy and warm. Each person contributed based on their abilities. Velthar, with his sharp intelligence, managed the fuel supply and calculated burn rates to ensure the fire never ran low. Rixina, once recovered, proved skilled at preparing food and maintaining the water supply. Korth, despite his damaged limbs, used his strength to help gather heavy stones and wood when Deho needed them. The shelter continued to improve. Deho added a second firebox to better distribute heat. He created a smoke management system that kept the air clean while maintaining warmth. He built better storage areas and even fashioned simple furniture from stone and wood. The Ondal system now heated an area large enough for all 4 beings comfortably. In the observation station, the galactic audience watched with an emotion they rarely felt. Hope. The trial had started as a test of survival, a way to identify which species could endure extreme conditions. But it had become something more. It had become a demonstration of what was possible when beings worked together. Director Halvor studied the humans' shelter with scientific fascination. The temperature differential is remarkable, he said to his team. Outside is -95 degrees. Inside is +15 degrees. A difference of 110 degrees maintained with nothing but fire, stone, and determination. One of the observers spoke up. Director, there is a growing request from the Galactic Council. They want to know the true purpose of this trial. They say the human has already proven humanity's worth. Why continue? Halvor's crystalline body pulsed slowly. Because there is one more thing to test. One more question to answer. Will the human maintain his compassion when the trial ends? Or was it simply strategy? On the morning of day 10, the final day of the trial, Daeho woke before the others. He tended the fire quietly and prepared a morning meal. As he worked, he thought about what would happen when the trial ended. Would he return to Earth as a hero? Would anything change? He had not done this for glory. He had done it because it was right. Because his grandfather had taught him that survival meant nothing if you lost your humanity in the process. The others woke slowly. They ate together, the conversation quiet. Everyone knew this was the last day. The extraction shuttles would arrive at sunset. The trial would be over. What will happen to us? Rixna asked. When we return to the station? Velthar shook his head. We failed the trial. We would have died without the humans' help. Our species will be recorded as failures. Korth's mandibles clicked softly. I do not care about that anymore. I learned something more valuable than passing a test. I learned that strength without wisdom is useless. I learned that pride without compassion is empty. Daeho looked at his companions. You did not fail. You survived. That is what matters. But we only survived because of you, Rixna said. No, Daeho replied. We survived because we worked together. I built the shelter, yes, but you all contributed. Velthar managed our resources. Rixna kept us fed and organized. Korth provided strength when we needed it. We survived as a team. The day passed quickly. Daeho taught the others how to maintain the Ondal system. He explained every detail, every technique. If they ever needed to build such a shelter again, they would know how. As the afternoon light began to fade, a transmission came through. Director Halvor's voice filled the shelter. Participants, the trial will conclude at sunset. Extraction shuttles are being prepared. But before we proceed, I wish to speak with Daeho privately. Daeho stepped outside the shelter. The cold hit him immediately, but he was used to it now. A shuttle descended and the door opened. Director Halvor's crystalline form stood in the entrance. Come aboard for a moment, the director said. Daeho climbed into the shuttle. The door closed behind him, sealing out the cold. Halvor gestured to a seat and Daeho sat. You have done something remarkable, Halvor began, but I need to ask you some questions. Honest questions? Ask, Daeho said. Why did you save the others? This was a competition. You could have won easily by letting them die. Daeho thought for a moment. My grandfather fought in a war when he was young. He saw terrible things. People dying. People suffering. When he came home, he taught me something important. He said that survival is not enough. Any animal can survive, but humans should strive to be more than animals. We should strive to be human, and being human means helping others when you can. Halvor pulsed with interest. Even when helping others costs you something? When it puts you at risk? Especially then, Daeho said. What is the point of surviving if you become something horrible in the process? I would rather die helping someone than live knowing I let them suffer when I could have acted. The director was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again. This trial was not what you thought it was. The survival test was real, yes, but it was not the true purpose. We were testing for something else. Daeho waited. The galaxy is running out of habitable planets, Halvor explained. We need species who can colonize hostile worlds. Species who can take frozen wastelands, burning deserts, toxic atmospheres, and make them livable. We have been testing different species for years, looking for those with the ability to terraform and adapt. Understanding dawned on Daeho. You were looking for builders, not just survivors. Exactly. Every other species we tested simply endured the conditions. They waited for rescue or death. But you built civilization. In 10 days, you created a functioning home with heat, food storage, and organization. More than that, you created community. You brought competing species together and made them cooperate. Halvor's crystalline body shifted colors, a sign of deep emotion. Humanity has something the galaxy needs desperately. You do not simply adapt to your environment. You change your environment to suit you. And you do it with compassion. With the drive to lift others up with you. Daeho absorbed this information. So what happens now? Now I make an offer. Humanity is invited to join the Galactic Terraforming Coalition. Your species' knowledge, your survival technologies, your determination, they are needed. Planets that we thought were uninhabitable might become homes with human techniques. The director gestured to a display showing the Ondal system in Daeho's shelter. This heating method alone could save millions of lives on cold world colonies. Your species has countless such technologies. Irrigation systems for deserts, building techniques for extreme environments, methods that other species dismissed as primitive but which are actually ingenious solutions. I am just one person, Daeho said. I cannot speak for all humanity. No, but you represent them well. Return to Earth. Tell your leaders what I have said. We will begin formal negotiations, Daeho nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that mattered most to him. What about the others? Velthar, Rixna, Korth? They are recorded as failures. That is not fair. Halvor pulsed with what might have been amusement. They are recorded as the first successful members of a cross-species survival team. Their species will not see them as failures. They will see them as pioneers. As sunset approached, the extraction shuttles landed near the shelter. Daeho returned to his companions and told them everything. Their reactions were mixed: surprise, relief, hope. They emerged from the shelter together. The four beings stood in the cold wind and looked at the structure they had shared. It seemed small from the outside, just some stones and a thermal blanket, but it had been their home, their salvation. Will you destroy it? Velthar asked, looking at the director. Halvor shook his head. No, this shelter will be preserved as a monument, a reminder that survival is not about individual strength or advanced technology. It is about determination, compassion, and the willingness to build rather than simply endure. A plaque was placed at the entrance. It read, "Here, a human taught the galaxy that survival is not about waiting for death but building life, even in the coldest void." The four companions boarded the shuttle together. As they lifted off from the frozen surface, Daeho looked down at his shelter one last time. The fire still burned in the Ondal system. Heat still radiated from the stone channels. It would burn for days more, a warm light in the frozen darkness. When they arrived at the observation station, they were not greeted as failures or even as survivors. They were greeted as heroes. Representatives from hundreds of species wanted to speak with them, to learn from them, to understand what they had accomplished. Korth, the proud insectoid who had mocked humanity, now spoke of them with deep respect. I learned that strength without wisdom is useless. The human taught me this. Velthar, the intelligent reptilian, shared his data on the Ondal system with scientific communities across the galaxy. This technology is thousands of years old on Earth, but it is revolutionary to us. We have much to learn from humanity. Rixna spoke of the human concept of community. On my world, we wait for conditions to improve. We are patient. But humans create the conditions they need. And more than that, they share those conditions, W.